It's hour 2 of advanced server-side scripting. We're going to take a look at the Express generator, which is the tool we're going to be using to build our applications kind of from now on. So if we have a look at what the generator does. Now this is a tool we're going to use regularly. So this is an NPM package we're going to want to install globally. So that way we can create additional applications using this kind of generator moving forward. So just to give you a preview of what we're going to do, we're going to install the generator globally. And then to create a new application, we'll actually just use the command express, and then we'll name our application. We're not going to do this yet. We'll do it in a minute. So this is what will get built. It'll create a package.json automatically. We no longer need to run npm in it. It'll create an app.js, which will require a whole bunch of dependencies and set up a bunch of paths and configuration items. It also will create a public folder, and inside of public, we're going to get a JavaScript and images and a style sheet, along with the default CSS file that we can either keep or modify. It's also going to set up 2 other subfolders, one called roots and one called views. And if we think about what those actually are, this is where we're starting to get into our MVC pattern. So all of the views, all the HTML templates we create, they're going to go in that views directory. Now, for some reason, Express doesn't like using the word controller. I have no idea. But it instead will create a folder called roots, and the files in there, those are the controllers. Those are the logic files. But for some reason, Express likes the terminology roots instead of controllers. I don't really know why. So in this course, I may use those terms interchangeably, a root or a controller. The model piece, well, we'll get into that in another week or 2 when we start working with our database. So we'll have no data component for today or for your assignment as well. So that's what kind of the directory tree will look like. It even gives us a default homepage called index, and it will give us default controller, also called index, for handling URLs and deciding what pages to load at particular URLs. So I'm going to stop my server. I'm going to go up 1 level. So I'm going to type cd ... to get out of my lesson 4 part 1. Now, normally what we've been doing so far, every time we create a new application, we're building the folder first, and then we're writing the code inside. With the generator, it will actually create the folder for us with all the subfolders. So I don't need to make a lesson 4 part 2 folder here in Windows. The generator is going to build that folder for me. But the first thing we need to do, following kind of the instructions, is we want to install this tool globally. So then we can make as many Express applications as we want. So I'll just clear out my command prompt. So we're starting fresh. So go just to our root lesson 4 folder. And I'm going to run that npm command over on the left. npm install express-generator -g. So we want to install this globally. I've already installed it globally, but it doesn't matter. It will just install a fresh version over top. So please run this command. And it adds it, same place nodemon is stored in our users directory, our username app data roaming npm. That's where nodemon gets added to. So now we want to create a lesson 4 part 2 website using the generator. So we're going to run the command express lesson 4 part 2. And we want to add at the end -e. I'll explain why in a minute. I won't run the command yet. I will explain. When we created an application with the generator, we've got these options here. And the minus E or minus EJS, it determines what type of HTML templates we want to use. Now, if we don't specify minus E, the templates that are going to get created are using a templating engine called Jade. Now, Jade is kind of cool, but it's also really easy to break because the way Jade works is all of your tags, there's no brackets around your tags, but they all have to be nested in a certain way. And if you put in one extra space, it breaks the whole thing. So even though it's writing a lot less code, it's easy to break. We're going to use the EJS template engine instead. There's two reasons. Number one, it's a lot harder to break than Jade. Number two, the EJS syntax actually looks pretty similar to the ASP.NET MVC Razor syntax. So it's pretty similar. We've already played around with MVC and ASP.NET. So it's actually similar to get used to. So whenever we create these express applications with the generator, we always want to specify minus E. Otherwise, it's going to expect us to use Jade templating, which we don't want. So I'll just hit enter and run that command. It runs super fast. And now it says, okay, we created all this stuff for you. Cool. So now when I go in, I have a lesson 4 part 2 folder. And inside I've got all this stuff that the generator scaffolds out for us. We only have to do 2 more steps, then we can actually launch this in the browser and see the home page. So we'll keep following along. So now we need to change directories. You can see the instructions right here. CD lesson 4 part 2. So let's go into the new folder we created. What gyms did you guys go to? Bayfield Street? So we'll change directories, go into lesson 4 part 2. And now it says we want to run npm install, so it will download any packages that are specified in app.js as dependencies. Is going to require all of these. So again, Keyshawn, this comes back to your question from earlier. Why do we need minus save? Right? If I now run npm install, npm will go to npm.js and it's going to download all of these packages and create the node modules folder for us with all the dependencies. Whatever's in package.json gets installed with npm install. Okay, so all of these, and now if we go back, now here's node modules, and those 6 dependencies in package.json got downloaded along with all of the sub-dependencies. So now our application's ready to go. So now we can launch it. We haven't written any code. All we did was follow the command prompts on expressjs.com. For those of you who went to Guatemala to get freshly picked coffee beans on your 25-minute, 10-minute break. So I'll use NodeMon. Cool, server starting. It's good. And now we have a running site. We have a default homepage that they give us that we can launch. So this is where we're going to start, and we're going to add on to this. So for your lab, you'll use the generator to make a lab 3 site. For the portfolio, use the generator, make a portfolio or an assignment 1 site. So we don't have to spend time putting the site together. We'll just let the generator do it. Really not that different in Visual Studio, right? If we go in and create a new application, if we choose an MVC or web application and not empty, it gives us a whole kind of a starter template. So this is kind of the same thing. So our actual project, if I look at it, so right out of the box, It's tiny. It's 1.6 megs. That's what we get. So we want to open up this project in our code editor now so we can start playing with it. So I'm going to open up WebStorm. NodeMon is running, so we can make changes to it. It'll just do restarts, and we can refresh stuff in the browser. So we'll play around. We'll see kind of how the pieces work. We'll add some new pages. We'll add some new URLs. We'll make a header. We'll share it. If we have time, we'll add Bootstrap to this and start formatting it. We'll get it up and running on Heroku or Azure, or maybe both. So I'll open up my lesson 4 part 2 project. So here's all the things we get. JSON looks pretty familiar. The only thing you notice, there's only one thing in here we haven't seen before. What's kind of new? Okay, Morgan's new. So that's used for doing logging, yes. One other thing is different from what we've done before. Yeah, so we have some different dependencies. We're using EJS as the templating. So our start, notice there's no JS file. We're in the bin folder. Now we looked at bin, we had the bin folder when we were doing ASP.NET, right? That's where our compiled files went in ASP.NET. The generator does something similar. It compiles our JavaScript, and it uses this as kind of a starter file. We don't actually have to modify this file. But this also, so Priyank, this comes to your question, this will run now on Heroku because notice it uses whatever server port the server's designated. So we don't even have to specify a port anymore. This is built right in the generator, just automatically creates this stuff. So we won't modify this file. We have a public folder with images, JavaScripts, and style sheets. And inside of style sheet, we get a default CSS, which we could change, overwrite. If we want to add our own CSS, we're going to dump them here. So any public assets would go here. Node modules, we know what that is. Our views, so we get 2 pages right out of the box with EJS extensions. Index is our home page. It also gives us a default error page. So it's mostly HTML. We see this printed a few times. What does this represent? And where does that value come from? Yeah, but it's not PHP, right? So here it says Express, welcome to Express and Express. We don't see the word Express here. So that value's got to be coming from somewhere else, right? Yeah, from the, exactly. So our roots are in our controllers. So here's how this all works, right? We have a get handler @ so our root page. We've got our callback function, which should start to look familiar, request response next. And to load an actual page in the browser, we call res.render. So it loads a view called index. And it's passing in a JSON object with a variable called title. So whatever value we give that variable in our controller, that value is being passed to our view. So this is how we take server-side values, like say the results of a query, and pass it to our front end. We just call the name of the view and pass a JSON object with some variables. So this express router, we haven't used this before. This is what we'll use. It's a class that we use for handling and dispatching different URLs. So we have router.get, later we'll have router.put, post, delete, whatever HTTP method or verb we want to execute on a particular path. So then we also have, here's our main configuration. Here's the app.js. Let's kind of figure out what's going on here. The first section should be self-explanatory, right? Just linking in all our dependencies. These two lines are connecting up our controllers. So we have an index controller and a users controller. Let's think for a minute if we were going to build a site like Blackboard with Node, right? Rather than writing all the logic in index.js, we'd probably write different controllers for different parts of the application. So we might have a students controller that manages everything to do with students. We might have a courses controller for managing courses, instructors controller for managing all the logic and URLs around instructors. So we'll make one more root or controller later and add it into our app.js. We then set up the path to where all our views are. So by default, the views go in a folder called views. So that's where all the user interface files go. We're setting up the template engine as EJS. We're configuring things like parsing body for getting forms, and also setting up the location of our public path. So again, those public assets like client-side JavaScript, CSS, and images. If we don't want to use that folder, we could change it. But it's already configured to work inside of the public folder. And now here's how our application directs different requests to the different controllers. This means is when we get any request at our root file, that request should be handled by our index controller, this one. This will decide what page is supposed to load. If we get any requests that start with the URL/users, all of those requests are handled by our users controller here. So we can break up the logic within the application into different modules or sections. It also has a built-in some handling we can leverage and use, add on to for 404 or other errors. And then this whole file is public because it's exported, which we said last week. It just exposes a file as public so all the other files in the application can see it. So let's play around with this a little bit. Let's open up our roots index.js. First of all, let's change the title. Rather than having our application say, welcome to Express, let's have it say, lesson 4. So we're changing the value we're passing from the controller to the root. And I've got NodeMon running, so if I save my change, I shouldn't have to do a restart. I should be able to just go back to my browser and refresh it, and all the instances of the word express should get changed. Right, now it says lesson 4 here and here and here. So the view just displays whatever value is passed from the controller. So right now we're passing one value. Let's try and pass a second one. So we want a title. We've already got a variable called title. We want a second variable called message. And we want to display that value in our view as well. So we want to set some message in the controller, pass it to the user interface. So how would we do that? Where would we add in our second variable called message? We don't have to. Yeah, so we can say comma, whoops. So right after our value of lesson 4, let's now display a message. find it's a little easier to read. So we're passing one JSON object, but that JSON object can have multiple values. So now we should be also able to display our message variable on our view. So if we want to print this value out now in a paragraph tag, where would we have to go to add that code? Which view exactly? Which file? Yeah, we're going to go back to our index.ejs. And in here, we'll put on these EJS server tags. The equal sign is like a PHP echo command. It'll display that value. So now our page should be able to show both of these values.
What is index.ejs?
Well, where would all the EJ, so what is the purpose of index.ejs? It's a view. So which folder contains the views? Yeah. No problem. I wanted to ask you so that, you know, we could all be clear, we'd be clear on where they are. So now if I refresh, we've got both our title and our message coming from the root file now. So later on, just go here for a minute. Later on, maybe we want to display we have some URL like this. We'll pass in a student number that'll allow us to look up that student. So when we want to render the view, it might look something like this. We want to render, say, a student view, and maybe we'll pass in a JSON object that will look something like this. So this is how we would pass data from our logic files into our views. And then we would, you know, show each of those individual variables on the page, either as a read-only or maybe we'd put them into a form if it was like an edit page.
Could you also take a JSON file and just look through it?
You don't even have to. You'd read the file into one JSON object. You just pass the whole object. So later on, maybe we're going to write a query and we want to get back a bunch of data, right? So it'll be something like this. We're going to query the database. We get back a whole series of records. We would just pass back this data variable. Just pass the entire thing as one chunk back to our view. Now, one warning about these. Our variables are case sensitive. Right? Notice when I change it here, it's no longer purple and bold. Title is purple and bold because my code editor knows that that variable is declared here as lowercase. If I change it, it says that variable is not defined, right? PHP wouldn't do this. PHP message is just blank. But this will actually crash if you try and refer to a variable and the name doesn't explicitly exist in the root file. Okay. So there's a little gotcha. But we can tell, again, if we use a code editor like WebStorm, it's helpful because that color coding is a clue. And in fact, we actually get the code hinting. When I started typing MES, it came up in my list. So if your variable name has been declared and used in your root and it doesn't come up in the view, well, you're not using the same variable name in both places in that case. Okay. Let's create a couple more views, and then we need to add a couple more get handlers to load those views in our controller. Now I'm going to show you how to set up. I've set up WebStorm, so every time I make an EJS template, it gives me this, it gives me the base HTML. So I don't have to type like my doc type and head and body tags over and over again. So if you're using WebStorm, I'll walk you through how to set up an EJS template. So you kind of have your HTML boilerplate in there to save us time. So I'm going to go to my views, right-click views. If you choose new, you probably don't have EJS in this list. Anybody have EJS there or no? Probably not. It's not there by default. So if you click on Edit File Templates down at the bottom of this little context menu, I'll make this bigger. Do you have HTML5 here or XHTML? Do you have an HTML5 template for those using WebStorm? Over on the left here, it says templates. I have this option. This is HTML5. I don't know if anybody else does. Just HTML or just XHTML? Okay. Well, if you just have XHTML, that's fine. Click on it, and it says, you know, this is what an HTML page is going to look like. Just highlight everything in here and copy it. So copy that HTML template to your clipboard. Probably. There's probably different ways to set up templates in different editors. And then if you click the plus sign here, you can make a new template. So the name, call it EJS, and the extension is also EJS. So automatically when you say new EJS file, it gives it that extension. You don't even have to type that extension. And now for the code, just paste it in, and you can take out, you know, you can take out the old HTML stuff like this. So here's your EJS starter template. Then just click OK. Once you do this, every time you go and choose new file, EJS will be in the list. And if you create an EJS file, it'll give you this HTML to start with. So just click OK once you've done that. You don't have to do this. It's just going to save you time. So I'm going to make a new EJS. I'm going to make two new EJS files. I'm going to call them register and login. We'll build those pages out later. We won't build forms today. So I'll call this register. I don't need to give it an extension because I already set my template up to use EJS as my extension. If you're not using WebStorm, just create a new file and call it register.ejs. I'm just going to put an H1 tag on here that says register. No variables, nothing else. Once you have a register page, go ahead and create a login page that's exactly the same. Just let the H1 tag say login. And make sure these are created inside of your views folder. So I'll make one more EJS file, which I will call login. And I'll just put an H1 tag that says login. So there's no JavaScript code, it's just a plain old HTML file. We could create views with .html extensions, but then we can't inject any JavaScript in any server-side JavaScript in them. So we're better off to use EJS extensions in case we want to write any node code inside of them. It was the same thing in our PHP class. All our files, we had a PHP extension in case we wanted to use any PHP functions or variables inside. So now we've got these two pages set up. Let's try and load them. So when I go to localhost 3000, my home page works. That's good. When I go to register, we got a 404. When I go to login, we also get a 404. How come we're getting 404 errors when those views exist? Right. Because we haven't told Node what to do with those URLs. We haven't connected those files to those particular URL paths. So we could create another controller. We don't really need to. We don't need to create a new controller for every page. That's overkill. So where should we go to map that URL /register to load this view and the URL /login to load this view? We could do it in app.js, but then we need to create another controller. We want to map these URLs inside one of our existing controllers. Well, we could do it inside of users, or we can just do it in our root, right in our home. So let's try that. So we want to handle a GET request. It's not a POST because we're not processing a form. We're just loading the view. So our URL is /register. And we'll just call res.render register. Now our register page should load. We'll try it and then we'll come back here. I have a couple questions about this. So now our controller knows how to interpret this URL and knows what page to show. Now our register file is right here. It has a .ejs extension and it's inside of the views subfolder. Why don't we have to do this? Shouldn't I have to load it like this? Views/register.ejs. Why does it work both without the path and without the extension? Yep. Where did we specify that? Right. In app.js right here. The view engine, when we use -e to create the application, that writes this line of code in for us. So our application knows globally that all the views will have EJS extensions. Yes. What about, why don't we need this? Why don't we have to specify that register lives inside of the views folder? How does it know this? The line above, right? The views are found in the directory called views. So these things, this is also set up site-wide. So we never have to specify views as part of that path. They're always in views. So I don't need the extension and I don't need that initial path. So now to display our login page, you just need another get handler at login. So we use the express router, manage a get request here.
Are you just being passed into the this function? What is the next argument? Where is that used for?
The next allows us, if we want to do something after this, so let's say we have some other function that like sends an email or something. We want to do certain things, and then we would call next, and then the parameter would be the name of our email function. So it allows us to do something else after. 99% of the time, we're probably not going to do anything, so we ignore it. It's often also used for passing back an error. So if we get an error, we'll call next and pass that error object to the next function. We won't use it most of the time, but it's available if we want it. So now register should work. Login also works. So now we've got 3 pages we can load. So this is not like in a PHP web server where as soon as you create a page, you just type the name of that page and it loads. The names of the views don't load unless you explicitly use a get handler to load it on a particular URL. So we've matched the names that the URL and the name of the view is the same, but it doesn't have to be. We could have a friendly URL loading the name of a different view. They don't have to match. Artem, you had a question.
Yeah, the question is, can we have different template engines in one application?
You can have different templates. You can't have different template engines. You need to pick whether we're using Jade or EJS or something else. You can't mix them. It's a good question. Okay, so we've got 3 pages. We'll use all of these pages. Now it's time for we need a little poll. Okay, so in a minute later in class, we'll make a little header and we'll share it. So we have a link to the home page, a link to register, a link to log in. We also need to figure out, like we've done, well, not last semester, but I guess in our PHP class, we need to figure out what are we going to build. So this application we're building today, we're going to add on to it every week. So last year around this time, we built the beer store. So I need to put up a survey on Blackboard. I need 3 or 4 suggestions of what you guys would like to build for our mean stack application that we'll do in class. So I will jump over to Blackboard and create a quick survey, which you guys can vote on in a second. Okay, so what? So I need some ideas. Okay, what do you want to build? The class this morning voted for a books application, kind of like Amazon, to list books. I'd like 4 suggestions, and then you can vote. And we'll build whatever the majority.
This database, yeah.
Yeah, so what table? We're going to work with one table in the database to do create, read, update, delete, authentication. So what should that table be about? In PHP, we did beer. Let's do something else.
Sports teams.
Yes.
Okay, we could do teams. Okay, Tyler, as I say to my kids, if you're going to say no, you got to come up with another suggestion of your own. You can't just say no.
We can build like countries, capitals.
Okay, we could do countries. Movies. Okay, one more suggestion, then you can vote. Something else you're interested in. If we're going to work with it in class for 3 hours every week, may as well be something you like. Okay, games, video games, sure. All right. So there's our list. Whoops. Give me a second to make it available. Okay, so if you can now refresh your lesson 4 folder, it's the item at the bottom. You get to cast 1 vote as to what you'd like to build. So far I've got 17 votes. There's 19 of you in the room. I get 17 votes. So 2 people have still to cast their vote. Okay, oh, now we're up to 20 attempts. Sorry, 18 of 20. All right, everyone has voted. There are your results. So that's what we're going to build.
All right.
So that means we're going to need, now we could do everything with index.js, but it would make sense that index will kind of handle the public pages, and we're going to want a separate router or controller for games, for doing all of the create, read, update, and delete. So we're going to want to create a main games page. We're going to create a games controller that will load it. So let's do that now. So we've got a few things we need to do. Inside of views, I want to make a subfolder called games, and all of the views related to games will go in there. Okay. So right click your views, make a new folder. So now inside of views, we have a games folder. So all the pages that are related for adding, editing, viewing, deleting games, they go in there rather than having all our pages in the root. Helps us organize our application better. So now in here, let's create a games homepage. So we'll create a new EJS file that we will call index. And just like on ours, let's just put on an H1 tag that says games. So we'll add more views later for adding, for editing. We'll do those over the next few weeks. For now, we just want a main page. So we've set up a view. We need to set up a new root file or a new controller called games that will interpret all the URLs related to games and load the appropriate views. So now in my roots subfolder, I'm going to create a new JavaScript file. So our roots have JS extensions because they're just JavaScript code. Again, select roots, right click it, choose new JS file, and we'll call it games. And by convention, our controllers are typically plural. So they match a table name in our database, but we make it plural. So this file is going to look pretty similar to our other controller. We're going to need to require Express and create an Express router. We're going to make this file public. And then we're going to write one get handler that will load our games homepage. And then we're going to need to add this into our app.js. We'll take a break in a bit, but not quite yet. Now I'm going to use let because it's ES6, which is good practice. Notice the Express generator still uses var. So the stuff that was auto-generated will use var. So you can leave it. One student in my class this morning really didn't like having var in some places and let in another. So he went and changed all the instances of var to let. You can if you want. You don't have to. So we're creating a new express router to handle our URL mappings. So that's exactly the same as what index.js has. So now we want a get handler when a user goes to localhost/games. Now here, our URL is still just slash. It's not /games. We'll talk about why in a minute. And now we want to load this file, games/index. So it's inside of views, but we do need to specify the subfolder. We don't want the home page. We want the home page of our games section. We'll make this public by exporting it. Why is this slash? Why doesn't this say /games? This is a bit of a confusing part.
So the app module, when they're setting the controllers, just default for control, not default for the app.
Right. So we're going to tell app.js, whenever a request starts with games, use this controller. So we're in effect already inside the games folder here. So we don't need to specify the word games in our URL again. So we just need to add 2 lines of code to app.js to get this working, then we'll take a break. So here, we want to add a new games controller or router. Just like the generator already include the 2 controllers it built, we now want it to also include the controller we are building. So I've added line 11. And this is where we map all requests that start with /games should be handled by the games router. Whenever our URL starts with the word games, that request should get dealt with by our new controller. So most of the work we're going to do through the semester will be, most of the logic will be in the games controller rather than in the index controller. Now we should be able to load our page. NodeMon's restarted again and again. We should be able to hit localhost 3000/games and get our games page loading. We'll try it. So now our main page will run. So our controllers are used to handle the URL requests and decide what view to load. The views are user interface, our HTML files, and our app.js kind of directs the whole thing, pulls all the pieces together. So I added line 11 and I added line 29 to app.js. So again, here's my controller. Anybody have any questions before we have a break about what we've done to this point?
On the app process, why are we using the index mapping? Like before we were using the index, we were like about
You're right, we were, but we were mapping it before to specific functions. Now we're mapping them to the controllers. So the controller doesn't have the same order of preference as when we were calling functions right in this same file. It's a good question. So we have a little 4-page site we can move around in. So what we want to do after the break is we want to create a shared header so we can create links to all 4 of these pages and then embed that header on all 4 of them. We'll create a header and footer. So then we have a little site we can actually navigate through in the browser. If we have time, we'll see if we might add some styling with Bootstrap. We'll see if we might be able to deploy this to Heroku. And then I will give you your lab. So we will take a 10-minute break.